When I was a child, about 10 years old, many of you know that I grew up on Staten Island, and back then, Staten Island was mostly woods. There was the part that was near the ferry that was a little built up, where the Vanderbilts and other wealthy people would come for their summer outings. But where I lived, it was mostly all woods. And builders were just coming in, building little, like a block of houses, and then they would build another block, or whatever. And so that's what my early life was like. Everything was building up around us, and the wild nature of Staten Island, the woods and the swamp area, they were being, like it was being displaced and bothered. I use that as an intro because this one day, my family was coming home from Sunday morning worship. And y'all know I grew up Catholic. And the first Mass in most Catholic churches we call the dry Mass. No music. Not a piano, not a voice, nothing. It's just words. But it makes for a very short Mass. And that was good for my mother because my father worked for the parks and he worked on a golf course. So he had to get up at the golf course at 5:30 in the morning because the golfers were starting to come at 6, especially when it was nice out. So my mother would get us all dressed and ready to go, and she was good. She had the 4 of us down to the minute where we had to leave the house, and we would take the back road down to church, and then we would take the main road back home because that was where the deli was. And we would stop for donuts and rolls and the Sunday papers. And bagels were not even a thing. I don't think Staten Island knew they existed at the time. And I always want to say bagels, but we never got bagels. Anyway, on this particular day, we had just gone to the deli, and one of us would have one paper under our arm, another one would have another. My mother would give the bag of donuts to someone, and she had hands. She was holding hands of my 2 younger brothers. And we were just coming up the street, and there were a couple of kids from the neighborhood across the street, and they were like junior high school age, and they yelled to my 6-year-old brother, "Alex, you gotta see this turtle, it is huge!" And with that, my brother's hand left my mother, and he darted across the street, never looking to the right or the left to see if a car was coming. And this next moment of my life seemed to stand still. My mother let out a scream of Alex's name that I've never heard since or before. Tears rolled down her face. The screech of the car that was coming seemed to be like forever. And my brother Alex went like this to kind of guard himself, touched the front of the car, and continued to run to see the turtle, never being moved by what happened. Yet, it was a trauma that got carried. Now, in that same moment, all of a sudden, people who I didn't even know were around, somebody came, put their arms around my mother, said, "Everything's okay." There was an adult on the other side of the street who put their hand on my brother's shoulder and looked over at my mother as though to say, "I got him." And I don't remember what happened after that. But to this day, even though my mother's gone to heaven at this point, whenever we sit around the table and we talk about the turtle, remember the turtle, all of a sudden, we break into the story. What happened? Alex almost got killed. My mother said, "I saw Alex's life pass before me." She would say, "I saw my own life pass before me." It was a story, it was an experience that brought trauma to our lives. Especially, I would say, my mother. In the book, My Grandmother's Hands, the author, Reshma Menachem, talks about how trauma is embodied, that we tend to carry it with us as we go through life. And unless we are able to unload it, we bring it with us. And today, we have that stunning lesson from Isaiah, where God says, come to the waters. Come, you who are thirsty, you who are hungry. Eat without paying. God is saying, I've got you here. I've got you. I love you. I have a covenant with you. I am not going to let you go. We need to listen to these words, because in our world, we know so much trauma. And you and I, we may walk around thinking we don't have trauma, but my best guess is that we all walk with trauma, because we're all stepping out of this COVID time, and that alone, having been alone in our houses or distant from one another, like I know there's times that I'll walk up to somebody and I'll want to hug them and I'm not sure if they'll want to hug me, and so I just kind of stand there because I don't know. 3 years ago, I wouldn't even think about it. I would just wrap my arms around somebody. So I know that I carry trauma. Sometimes we carry trauma from our own lives. Sometimes we carry trauma from what we see on TV. There's been so much footage about what's going on in Ukraine that I know for myself, I even have to begin to turn the TV off. And when I watched Vladimir Zelensky address Congress last week, I just cried because it was so moving to me. God calls us, beckons us, invites us, desires for us to be healed, to be comforted, to be whole again. This beautiful, tender lesson from Isaiah, then, could be our prayer. Or maybe it's a prayer for somebody that you love. If stress is carried in our physical bodies, then we need to physically heal. And in this lesson from Isaiah, God says, I'm going to walk with you. And not only will I walk with you, but I'm going to comfort you. And so as we try to heal ourselves, either through getting involved in physical exercise, or doing therapy, or counseling, or talking to a friend, or whatever it might be, God's journeying with us. And God remains with us at the times when we have fallen short with who we can be. God remains with us when we have neglected to keep ourselves healthy, kind of like the fig tree in the gospel. You know how the gardener comes in and says, wait, don't cut it down. I'm going to feed it. I'm going to put the good soil around it and give me a year. So God's with us, even in a physical way, putting good soil around us, putting good nutrition around us, telling us to come, eat, even for free. God is the gardener who asks for another chance. And this is exactly why Jesus died on the cross for us. Because Jesus wasn't going to succumb to any of the bad things around him, but kept a focus on God the Creator and asks us to do the same thing. And it's exactly why Jesus gives us the Eucharist, to strengthen us for the journey. Jesus' desire for us is to live fully into all God has called us to be, never taking our eyes off of the Creator of life, and knowing all the time that covenant of love is waiting to embrace us, the deep, deep love. God beckons us into that intimate relationship. So I want to invite everybody to take your bulletin home today and turn it inside out so that Isaiah prayer is right up and center. And put it next to your bed, and right before you go to sleep, just pray that prayer. It's a beautiful prayer. And notice that even as you extend yourself to call on God, God is calling on you to be in right relationship. And imagine yourself using that sanctified imagination that I've spoken about a couple of times. Imagine yourself in the arms of God. Seek God and listen. And know that God seeks you. Come and be filled. Know that you are loved. Amen.